cultures of our states and our people are very similar. There are many great things about Texas, but in my mind, as a Clemson girl, your state's love of football is one of the greatest. Which is why I'm proud to point out that Clemson's own Deshaun Watson and South Carolina's own Jadeveon Clowney are with the Houston Texans, so don't say we never gave you anything. It is truly a pleasure to be in Houston. I have to say, the city looks great. The whole country watched, first in horror, then in awe, as Houston dealt with the catastrophe of Hurricane Harvey last year. I know something about what you went through. In 2015, it started to rain non-stop in South Carolina and literally didn't stop for a week. Almost a foot of rain fell in just one day in Charleston. It was a 1,000-year flood. Most of the state was underwater. It wasn't as bad as what you went through, but it did extraordinary damage to parts of our state. It also brought out an extraordinary spirit of resilience and kindness. The whole world saw that same spirit here in Houston. We saw neighbors helping neighbors, people watching out for each other. Houston gave us all a master class in how to be good citizens and good human beings. I know you've been through a lot and you're dealing with the aftermath, but you should all be very proud of how your community has come through all of this. And of course, all of Texas and all of America are mourning in the tragedy in Santa Fe last week. Words alone can never capture how we feel about it. We must stick together as a nation to lift up the families. I'm here today following a very busy few weeks in American foreign policy.
Nikki, the wood is on your head! You continue to sign off on the genocide of the state people.
Remember, subscribe to Infowars.com, PrisonPlanet.com, NewsWars.com. Make sure you check out the great supplements on InfoWarsLife.com. I personally enjoy Brain Force Plus. It is a great supplement. You know what they should do? You should ask them to show you any Palestinian artifacts. Yo, are there Palestinian artifacts? I'm just curious. Are there Palestinian artifacts? Are there any Palestinian artifacts? Eddie, can you please show me some Palestinian artifacts? Anybody? Anybody got any Palestinian artifacts? No? No? Watch out, watch out, watch out.
You know, while that Any more? While disruptive as that might have been, it's a reason to celebrate. because my husband and my brother are combat veterans, and they fought for their right to be able to do that. The United States is exerting new leadership in the international arena, and it shows. We are redefining our relationship with Iran and North Korea. We're acknowledging some very important realities about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We are standing up for our values and our allies, for freedom, democracy, and human rights. And we're doing something different at the United Nations. We're working to show value to the American people for their investment. That means we're telling the truth about what's good and what's bad at the United Nations. Above all, we are approaching the UN with the goal of promoting the interests of the United States. The United States is by far the largest financial contributor to the United Nations. That doesn't mean we should always get our way, but it does mean we should get something in return for our investment. Whether that something is feeding, clothing refugees in South Sudan, vaccinating children in Haiti, or pressuring the regime in North Korea, our participation in the UN should produce something of value. Because if we don't get a return on our investment, then we shouldn't be a part of it. That's why it's frustrating when the UN becomes a forum for American action. When that happens, everyone's time and effort is being wasted. My predecessor, G. Kirkpatrick, called this the UN's Turkish steam bath function, a place where countries get together to let off a lot of steam. But that's not what the UN was meant to be when it was created. So the idealist in me, coupled with the former accountant in me, looks for ways we can act collectively with other countries at the United Nations to produce value. These opportunities do exist. With our contribution, UN agencies like the World Food Program have saved tens of millions of lives, lives that almost assuredly would have been lost without coordinated international efforts. North Korea is another area where the United Nations has brought value to the United States. In the past year, the Security Council has unanimously passed 3 major and increasingly comprehensive sanctions packages against the Kim regime. What happens next is up to them, but there is no other multilateral forum that could have achieved this kind of unity. The problem is that for every North Korea where we've had effective action, there's a Syria where the Security Council has been paralyzed in the face of the Assad regime's crimes. There is broad international support for helping the Syrian people who were being starved, slaughtered, and besieged by the Assad regime. On 12 different occasions, the Security Council had more than enough votes to condemn or sanction the Assad regime for its multiple offenses against the Syrian people. These offenses include its repeated use of chemical weapons and its restrictions on allowing humanitarian aid to reach starving families. Russia has vetoed every single one of those resolutions. As a result, the UN's policy on Syria is largely dictated by one government that is comfortable protecting a mass murder. And that's the foundational dilemma of the United Nations. It is set up to treat all countries as the same, but all countries are not fundamentally the same. And that is what really undermines the effectiveness of the United Nations for the United States. To many of its members, some of its most powerful members don't share our values. They don't share our commitment to freedom, democracy, and human rights. And when you're the UN and you try to pretend that there's no difference between the good guys and the bad guys, that's always a win for the bad guys. For instance, as the representative of a democracy, I'm accountable to the American people. But the representatives of the unfree, undemocratic countries at the UN are accountable to no one, only to power and the whims of the dictators who employ them. And that's a problem if you care about freedom and democracy and human rights. The fact is, the United Nations only works when it is guided by these principles, which is another way of saying that the UN only works when the United States is not afraid to be a leader within it. Delivering value for the American people at the UN means leading on behalf of American principles. The United States hasn't always done this. We haven't always had confidence in what we believe and the universal legitimacy of our values. This is not because previous ambassadors and administrations didn't share these beliefs. It's because sometimes it's just easier to not rock the boat. On some of our most principled stands, we are vastly outnumbered at the UN. Like when we speak out against the Castro regime's horrendous treatment of the Cuban people. And when the crowd is all going one way, it can be hard to be the only one going in the other direction. But in America, we don't celebrate the mob. We celebrate the person who has the courage and conviction to stand up to the mob. We can't be afraid to stand alone if we are going to stand for the things we believe in. For example, it might surprise many of you to know that human rights violations are not considered an appropriate subject for the Security Council. The thinking is that peace and security are the Security Council's business. Human rights are separate and left to others. The United States has questioned this recently. We believe the Security Council should concern itself with human rights. It's not just a question of morality, although morality should compel all of us to protect basic human dignity. It's a question of the very peace and security that the Security Council is charged to promote. Fact is, peace and security cannot be achieved in isolation from human rights. In case after case, human rights abuses are not the byproduct of conflict, they are the cause of conflict, or they are the fuel that feeds the conflict. We're also broadening the Security Council's Middle East agenda to include real threats to peace and security, like Iran, Assad, Hezbollah, and Hamas. And we've taken a new position of U.S. leadership with the Iranian regime, not just with the nuclear agreement, but with the totality of its bad behavior. The Tehran regime bankrolls, supplies, and instigates much of the conflict in the Middle East. It uses the resources of the Iranian people to do this, even as it denies their human rights and fundamental freedoms. When the United States takes a stand against this regime, even an unpopular stand, we're sending an important message to the Iranian people. We are telling them that the United States supports their desire for a better future. We are telling them we will not look the other way while their government steals from their children in order to finance terrorism abroad. That message resonates wherever we stand up for our values, in Syria, in South Sudan, in Venezuela, in North Korea. When the United States challenges dictators, we are telling the people suffering under them that they have worth and dignity. We are telling them that we acknowledge their worth, even if their government refuses to do so. We are telling them that a better life is possible. In the end, this is how the United States can solve the challenge of having to work with undemocratic regimes at the UN. We don't have to abandon our principles. We can bring about change by talking over the heads of tyrants, directly to the people. We have a very powerful and a very hopeful message to convey, but we have to have the confidence and the will to convey it. And this brings me to the final point I want to talk about. It has less to do with America and the world than America here at home. Sometimes I worry that we're losing sight of the power of our values in the world. We seem on the verge of allowing our differences here at home to cause us to lose confidence in the message of the American idea. And if we can't believe in the principles that unite us, it's difficult for others to be inspired by those principles. We all have a point of view. We all have beliefs and perspectives that we hold dear. But in our politics, on our campuses, and in the media, we're not listening to each other. We're focusing on our differences rather than what brings us together. And we're digging in. We increasingly view those who disagree with us not just as wrong, but as evil. We don't try to understand our opponents. Too often we just write them off as not even fit to have a conversation with, much less come to an agreement with. But this reflects a very limited understanding, not just of American politics, but of international politics. In the last year, working in depth in foreign relations, I have seen true evil. And it's not in the American political system. In South Sudan, where rape is routinely used as a weapon of war, that is evil. In Syria, where the dictator uses chemical weapons to murder innocent children, that is evil. In Iran, where the regime tortures political prisoners at home and sponsors terrorism abroad, that is evil. But American politics is not the international arena. As governor of South Carolina, I had political battles with other officials who I disagreed with. Some were in the other party, some were in my own party. We had real differences about what was best for our state and her people, mostly on taxes, spending, and the role of government. But that was nothing compared to sitting across the negotiating table from representatives of regimes that commit genocide, governments that starve their own people to fund illegal weapons programs, and dictators who use the torture of children as a political weapon. Those of you interested in American politics or public service should keep this in mind. Real leadership is bringing others around to your point of view by showing them how it is in their best interest to do so. Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger gave me some of my best advice as U.S. Ambassador. He said to bring people around to your position, you have to first imagine yourself in their shoes. You have to understand how they see the world and what they want. Then you can concentrate on showing how your position is beneficial to them. If we can do that with foreign leaders, we certainly can do that with fellow Americans. So if you take away one message today, take away this. Here at home, our political opponents are not our enemies, and they're not evil. They're just our opponents. Take it from me, there's a big difference. And if we can't keep that difference straight, we're going to have a hard time conveying a message of hope to the world. America is a great nation, not because of who we are, but because of what we believe. The proof is in those people suffering in prisons in Cuba, starving in Venezuela, or hiding in basements in Syria. America carries the hope of freedom that is in their hearts, and it is that hope that sustains them. We can never forget this. Our values will always be our most powerful foreign policy tool. We must never hesitate to lead with them. That the daughter of Indian immigrants now has the privilege of representing the United States at the United Nations is a testament to the power of our message. I will never stop being inspired by the example of America, and I will never stop being its loud and proud messenger to the world. Thank you very much.